I think my first question is going to be a very simple and basic one. I'd like to ask Cindy and Vic, what is a peer respite house? What are we talking about here? And what does it look like? Who's served? Who staffs it? Can you just give us a brief brief description of what we're talking about when we talk about peer respite houses, and just a little bit about, you tell us which house you're involved with.
So I'm Vic Welly. I am currently located in Menominee, Wisconsin, and that is home to Monarch House Peer Run Respite, which is one of 5 and soon to be 6 peer run respites in the state of Wisconsin. And peer respite, the way I describe it to people, it's a short-term, overnight, home-like place where people can come and stay for a few days if they are experiencing some sort of crisis related to mental health, substance use, trauma, or other big life-interrupting events. And it's a completely non-medical, non-clinical space where everybody who works there has gone through their own challenges related to mental health, trauma, or substance use, and are providing support based on that mutual shared connection and grounded in values of creating as much choice and space for people to define what healing looks like for them, and offering possibilities to explore what it is they're wanting going forward to make whatever changes are needed in their life, or to get supports in whatever way makes sense for them.
Just a couple real quick follow-up questions, and I'm going to ask Cindy about the respite house in Western Mass. How long have you been running your house?
Well, I've been involved with Peer Run Respites for about 5 years. This current program, Monarch House, was founded in 2018 and has been operating since then, and is open to 4 individuals at a time. It's a 4-bedroom house.
That was the next question, how many people you have in it. And who funds this?
The current Peer Run Respites in Wisconsin are funded through a state grant through the Department of Health Services. And that has given us a lot of freedom in terms of being free from Medicaid reimbursable services, not having to do those kinds of medical assessments, and being able to run fairly autonomously, which is a surprise considering, that it is tied to the Department of Health Services. So we are really fortunate in the state of Wisconsin to have that funding.
Well, great. And that's a little bit of what you'll be discussing at the summit on October 3rd. So you can really flesh out how it works and some of the challenges and who you serve. And there's so many questions to be asked, in fact. Let me turn to Cindy. Cindy, you've been, it's the Soteria House. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Can you talk about how long that's been running? How it serves people, how people come there, and where you're at now with the Soteria House, but really give a description of what it is.
So for me, a Soteria House, as somebody who's gone there to avoid forced hospitalization, is a wonderful place where people can go. It's a house, it's in a neighborhood. There's 3 bedrooms, everybody has their own room, and the people who work there are all people, like Vic had talked about, people who have gone through their own struggles. Nobody's required to define what that struggle is. It's just, I'm having a hard time. We generally ask people what's going on. I know the last time I went there, I really couldn't even have a conversation. And, I need help, period. And what is beautiful for me with a FIA is that nobody's there to tell me what to do or to fix me, but they're really there to approach me with curiosity, and I get to determine how to best use the space. And so for me, I'm a person who used to be locked in seclusion for days, and somehow that was helpful to me. And the people, I didn't like that, but the people at AFIA said, well, we have rooms here. You can go stay in your room for 2 days if that is what's helpful for you. Then you can do that, and you can come and go out of that room whenever you want. And I was like, wow, now the power to figure out what works for me is in my hands. versus somebody else telling me what I should, ought, or must do. Another incredible feature for FIA that was starkly different than being in the hospital is at one point I have this moment of clarity where I'm capable of having a conversation, and it's at 3:30 in the morning. And I asked the person working, what are you doing tonight? Are you awake? And they're like, sure, and so we could have this conversation in this moment of time for me. Whereas if I had been in the hospital, I would have been told to go to my room or literally chased down the hallway with an injection of Haldol. So it was like this really different atmosphere to be able to come and get away from the stressors of the world and be able to be present to have conversations that were on my agenda, and to talk about what I needed to talk about versus doing the symptom checklist.
So that's another really nice description of how different it is from being put into a hospital. Obviously, people are coming on their own, they're just showing up at the door or asking to come there. The one thing I think, and this is sort of a question that will then transition to Soteria in just a bit, how long are people staying? And the reason I ask this and how long can they stay, if you have a person in crisis, sometimes it's not easy for a crisis to resolve in a short period of time. So how do you manage the length of time people can stay at your respite house?
So I'm the kind of person who'll even dissect that word crisis. Whose crisis is it anyways?
Okay.
Me having to go there was not my crisis, but it was my prescriber's crisis that I was no longer taking the medication. And so in any event, I needed a place to go, and it was better than going to the hospital. So people can stay 7 days. If they're in the beginning, sometimes people would be there and a family member would pass while they were there. And so there was some wiggle room to extend that. But while somebody's there, we have a community bridger. So if somebody is interested into getting connected to the broader Wildflower Alliance or a community of their choice, the hope is that they're building connection and bridges that last longer than the days that they're there. And we also, that bridger that we have can follow up with people when they leave. But for me, sometimes I couldn't even figure out what the problem was or the distress was or what I wanted to do until I got out of it. I needed to get out of this situation and have somebody, in my mind, reasonable to talk it through with. Because many of the answers were in me if I was provided the space to be able to explore them.
Great. Well, thank you, Cindy. And I think, again, this is a great sort of introduction to what will be discussed at greater length on October 3rd. And I actually do think that's an important thing for people to think about who will be coming, because people have, at sometimes they need long-term community involvement, that sort of thing. So this, I think it's important that this sense that it can be a bridge into a community is good to know. Which leads me to Voice. The Soteria project, which started, I think, in 1972. I'm not quite sure when the house opened, but it was something about that time. June
5th.
So in the history of psychiatry, in the history of the psychopharmacology era, the Soteria House actually occupies a very sort of pivotal, fundamental part of that history. And often people refer to the Soteria project as the path not taken, so to speak.
But Soteria was a place that was going to be different than the medical model itself. So when you think about Soteria, the issue comes up with, we talk about being with versus doing to. And what that essentially means, doing to is a reflection of, you have to go think about the medical model. You're doing to someone, you're in control. At Soteria, the staff didn't see themselves in control of the patient in the hospital. They were part of our community. We were sort of bringing them in. The other part was key, that we were not taking them out of the society into a separate institution. So we were not institutionalizing people. So in some ways, we're normalizing normal human behavior. So it's not, it separates the issue of disease versus non-disease. If you think of, so you have to think, it gets complicated thinking about it, but it's really, you think about Soteria, you think about 6-bed unit house, that Victorian house at Soteria, but that's not Soteria. Now, it is part of Soteria. Soteria is the community of people who went through staff, volunteers, residents, and it evolves to a huge community of people, basically in the Bay Area. And so it's sort of, it's complicated. It's sort of a way, my personal thing, it's sort of a way of separating yourself independently from your family, but not, I don't like the word independent, because when you talk about independent, because the most independent person is a hermit. Bill Gates is not by any definition independent. He's interdependent. And that's what you have to think about Soteria. The interdependency is the issue. It's making you a part of us. And so if you have to think about Soteria, it's much larger than the house itself.
So, Royce, this is fantastic. I want you to save some of this great information for the summit itself, but really great. And I think the best thing here is you can see a link. It's, you can see a philosophy that was present in Soteria. Now, maybe there's been some changes with the respite houses, but at least you can see some of the same philosophies of being with and that sort of thing. Last quick question, and we'll flesh this out much more on the summit, but as you know, it was a research project, in essence meant to compare this non-medical form of being with to conventional care. Can you give us a hint of the outcomes?
Oh, so the outcome, okay. I think the thing you have to look at in terms of outcome of Soteria is that what is different between the two systems. If you think of one of the issues that by creating a community of people, that means that everybody in that community have access to each other. So that means the flow, it goes to the house, to the community, to out, and it happens outside. And the first thing it does, it blurs the roads. The issue for me is the stratification. You minimize stratification in a system. In a hospital, you have the psychiatrist who's definitely in charge. You have the nurses, you have the psychologists, and it goes down and you have the patients. At Soteria, you had...
I'm going to give a little tease here for getting people here on. That's great, by the way. I mean, I think when you talked about the outcomes and the difference in power structures and stratification, I mean, that is an outcome. I just want to put an outcome that was published by Lauren Mosher, just because this was an experiment that was trying to say, should we do it this way or should we do it this way? Non-medical or medical way. And Lauren Mosher at the time was head of, quote, schizophrenia studies. And he reported better outcomes for those treated with the non-medical way, with the Soteria. And I just want to add that because that's sort of language and outcomes that is common to the larger, society, profession. You could discuss whether you want those outcomes, but in terms of functioning, even by medical model standards, it produced better outcomes. Let's put it that way, okay? I think that's the way to have people come to this summit, which I think is so important, both to learn about what happened in the past, what is happening today with peer respites, and also how this effort fits into a larger question of how a society organizes its services, its care, its thinking. So thank you all. I can't wait till Sunday, the October 3rd. We'll have a great discussion.